Hi, I'm Georgette Pierre, and you're listening to Black and Nuance Podcast, dispelling the idea that Black people are monolithic. Growing up in a Caribbean household with immigrant parents, education was huge for them, mainly my mother. She had 4 children, with my 2 eldest siblings being born overseas. My sister Iona, who's now an ancestor, didn't want any school loan debt and used to take classes at a community college when she was alive. Then here I come, going super gusto on the formal education route. After high school, I went to college at a 4-year institution and then attended grad school and got my master's degree, becoming a second-generation college student. It didn't click at the time, but then it made sense as I started going through the motions of being in school. With all the student loan debt I came out of grad school with, I questioned if all this formal education was even worth it. I'm grateful for the access it afforded me and the lessons that it taught me. But goddamn, 6 figures in debt that most people spend the rest of their lives paying off is a little criminal. I also didn't do anything related to the degrees I received, so there was that. Apparently, I wasn't the only one.
I have a formal education, right? Just not in what I do now.
That's my co-producer, Wize, Grazette, that ended up leaving the industry he got a degree in. I too decided to explore other interests unrelated to my degrees because I was very clear on what I wanted my life to look like. The college experience aided in that process, despite my feelings around how much I owed these hoes. Hoes being the school loan companies.
When I went to college, everyone was telling me, people who had, I guess, graduated already, or people who were, in different stages in their career, they would say things like, oh, well, whatever you're going to school for right now, like, you're not going to be doing that in your future. They used to say things like, most people, they switch careers by like 27, 28. And I just thought that was like ridiculous, because it's like, why would I even go to school and pay all this money to switch careers? Like, that just it made no sense to me at the time. And then I came out from college. I graduated with my bachelor's degree in 2010. And I worked in the industry for 4 years or so, and I hated it. And I mean hated with a capital H.
Wize had a lot to say regarding this episode's theme of to degree or not to degree, but I'll let him introduce himself to the collective.
I'm a podcast producer by nature. I'm a storyteller by nature. I've been a storyteller my whole life, if I'm being honest. But in 2015, I launched a podcast network called the Indie Creative Network to provide a space for Black and Brown creators to get the tools and resources required to run a sustainable podcast. Through that journey, I have met some amazing people, including the amazing Georgette Pierre here.
Oh,
and,
thank you.
Now I still run that podcast network. I have a couple of audio ventures going on as well, too. And I am the podcast coordinator for Standout Design Group, which it's a huge podcast, a huge company in architecture and design. And they own magazines like Interior Design Magazine, Lux Interior and Designs, and just the whole A&D space. So huge opportunity for myself, and it just shows this constant growth. So yeah, hi.
The one thing we brought up was this formal educational journey that some people take, and the informal educational journey some people take. To degree or not to degree, that's the question, right? And I talk a little bit about my formal education, but what led me to go down that route and the amount of debt it left me in. And so, while it's kicking it off, can we speak to some of your experience and you deciding to go the informal route instead of getting a formal education? And what was the catalyst for that? Because I know for me, if I had to only if I was a hell no to loans, my journey would look a lot different.
Right.
On doing the formal education route. So yeah.
So I want to preface this by saying I have a formal education, right? Just not in what I do now.
Oh,
and
right. So let's
I
define
want,
that. Thank you for saying that.
yeah,
Defining formal education, if you went to an accredited college or institution, whether it was a
correct.
PWI, which is predominantly white institution, or an HBCU, historically black college or university. So you decide to get an official degree from somewhere, even if it was as simple as a bachelor's degree, or you kept going up the
Hmm.
ranks of getting a master's degree, a doctorate, additional degrees. And so, and informal is you just decided to maybe do a community college or get certificates or certifications in
Hmm.
specific specialties around the skill sets that you were specializing in.
Right. So for me, I have a formal education in website development and internet commerce. Now, as I told you before, I work in podcasting, so very little crossover
Mm,
outside of just the technology aspect. There's very little crossover, very very little. Um, I will say that it's crazy when I went to college, everyone was telling me, people who had, I guess, graduated already, or people who were, in different stages in their career, they would say things like, "Oh, well, whatever you're going to school for right now, like you're not going to be doing that in your future." They used to say things like, most people, they switch careers by like 27, 28, and I just thought that was like ridiculous, because it's like, why would I even go to school and pay all this money to switch careers? Like, that just it made no sense to me at the time. And then I came out from college. I graduated with my bachelor's degree in 2010, and I worked in the industry for 4 years or so, and I hated it. And I mean hated with a capital H. Just being young, black, in this in a very early tech space. Well, not really like
mhm,
early per se, but like
mhm,
in a
mhm.
tech space that was still like diversifying itself, and is still diversifying itself. There was just not a space for this young black man to tell people like, hey, I can create this website for you, and I can build this way, but from a usability standpoint, from a user experience standpoint, this is not going to work well. People didn't like, basically they were not happy with taking directions from me at 22, 23. So I spent some time doing that. And as I was in that process, I realized that, I'm actually more interested in entertainment. I had an opportunity to be a guest on a radio show, that was my first time ever even being in front of a mic. Um, and that was just an amazing experience. I just similar to what I'm doing right now. Like, I was sitting in front of a mic and I had headphones on. I could hear myself crisp, and I was like, "Whoa, this seems like this is for me, actually." And that's when I realized that this is maybe a career that I would want to get into. So I
Mhm.
started this slow shift, essentially, to say, okay, well, I need to build myself up in this community, but also build up my skill sets and relationships, because I recognize that entertainment is more so a relationship based field than anything else I had ever been
It
involved in
is.
at the time.
In addition to the experience, right? Like, who gets you in, what keeps you in the door,
Mm-hmm.
as they say. I'm curious to know, so when you started off in tech, what Black and Nuance is dispelling the idea that Black people are monolithic, but also with season 4, really getting into the nitty-gritty of our nuanced journeys and how we had to navigate some of those things. And so you said there were people that didn't wanna listen to you. One, why do you think that is? How did you navigate that? And then how did that roll over into how you started running your business when you decided to move away from the super techie side and building websites, and you're like, fuck it, I'm gonna go to the entertainment side where I really actually enjoy contributing in a different way that with a foundation that you got to create.
Yeah. So I would say, the hardest part about, telling people that were older than me what to do was the fact that at the time, I'm not sure I was as confident in what I wanted to say or what I knew. I
Mhm.
originally, like, I was working in a marketing company, essentially.
Hmm.
And that's actually, I'm gonna be honest with you, most of the places that I worked at when I was a web developer was like for marketing places or for marketing companies where they got essentially like hired by corporate companies, you know, Fortune 500s, Fortune 100s, or whatnot, to do their marketing for them, whether it's like building a website or making an email campaign or something like that. That was generally the work that I was involved in. And yeah, just like explain to people who have been in marketing for 10 to 15 years but are not tech based, don't understand coding language, or you know, user experience, or hell, like, is the site even going to work in general? Like, people just, it was just a lot of technical explanations where it was just a harsh generational shift. Just imagine someone from like a Gen Zer now trying to speak to someone that's like an older millennial. You know, it's
I
two
think it would
things.
be
Two
worse,
things
like them
entirely
trying to manage baby boomers.
different.
A
I dealt with
mad
some.
ooh, God, because baby
Mm,
boomers are our parents, right?
yeah,
Like
I
at
mean,
least,
I dealt with some of those too. You know,
yeah,
it's
yeah.
just, it was just so many layers, and then of course like the layers of like corporate and, you know, just long term relationships. Even in marketing, actually, marketing is very similar in to the entertainment space where it's like very relationship based. I gotta say, the only thing I really took from my tech experience was the tech side, like what I actually, the technical aspect of things,
Which makes
because
sense. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, I didn't really want anything else. That was toxicity beyond. And people talk about like toxicity in entertainment, but let me tell you something. Tech is something crazy. But I transferred a lot of the tech stuff because I realized that a lot of people who were in entertainment were not tech as technically astute as I was. You know,
Mm-hmm.
like there were not a few people, but it's just like, if there were, you know, 10 jobs in entertainment, two of them are tech focused. You know, like even now, like you could be, I don't know, like technically astute on social media, right? But not know how to like build a, like, use MailChimp or stuff like that, or use WordPress. Like those are things that generally like you don't have that crossover as much,
Yeah.
but those are things that like I thrived in. You know, I worked with, when I first came in entertainment, super indie. I connected with a couple friends of mine. They had a group called Scene Media. I used to make rappers landing pages because what do rappers need? People to find them online, drop their music on SoundCloud, help them get their things like up on like ASCAP and BMI, like just the technical side, the business side of things that people just were not as familiar with.
Yeah.
Um, that was more so before, as I was in my transition from super tech to, oh, I can actually like get involved in entertainment. So that's when I started this show called the Encore Radio Show, and that was what people started to really know me more for at the time, because I interviewed hip hop artists, I interviewed business owners in the community and influencers to just find out like what was going on in New York City,
Mm-hmm.
and putting it out to like my audience of people, because at this time now I have like my friends from college, I got friends that I went to school with down in North Carolina, I have, you know, my friends in New York, my family and my friends in Barbados. Like I had been all over, and I'm like, oh well, I have a lot of people that I'm tapping in with from all over the world. Let me give them something to tap into. That's where this whole thing started, really and truly.
And so it makes me think about, because I know we vibe on having, immigrant parents that
Mm-hmm.
migrated from their countries and the islands. Their urgency around education, obviously, urgency and prioritization looked a lot different than ours, right? Because we didn't necessarily
Mm-hmm.
grow up with the resources they did or didn't have back home, as we say. What are your thoughts about society's gaze of prioritizing formally educated people over those that aren't? Do you think that it hurts or hinders how we pursue the careers we truly want?
It absolutely hurts. It absolutely hurts everyone. the society, the people on both sides, whether you are, that person who has that high paying job, like you are white collar or whatever it is, or you're the blue collar worker, everyone gets hurt because, for one, diversity in thought. If you're only working with people
Mm-hmm.
who are white collar, they ain't thinking about no blue collar shit. They don't know nothing about no blue collar shit. Vast majority of them, and the ones that do are not even thinking about that anymore because they're not trying to go back to that space. Their
Yeah.
parents were blue collar workers and struggled real bad, and they're not trying to ever see that for themselves or for their future. Don't blame me for it. And a more recent term or modern term would be essential workers.
Oh, yes.
These are
Yes, yes,
all of our
yes.
essential
Yes.
workers who were grinding like crazy during the pandemic. They were the ones that could not work remote. You truly could identify who was a blue collar worker,
Yeah.
essential, versus who was a white collar worker, remote workers, during the pandemic. It was very blatant.
Yeah.
Like those
Mm-hmm.
people, they're not as familiar with the other side. So they're
Right.
not even thinking about the fact, like, okay, well, some of these jobs can be done at home, or what is the safest solution to do this? What's the safest way to have this thing done?
Yeah.
But they're doing that from the safety of their home.
Yep.
It's a different process when you have to risk yourself,
Yep.
or you think about risking yourself. It's a very different
Yep.
thought
Your
process.
life. Yeah.
It hurts everyone all around.
So, one big disclaimer, these opinions are our own. This conversation isn't meant to be a finite overview of how one navigates their formal or informal education journey. We're just offering insight into ours to connect the dots on how we got to where we are in our careers. That's it. Society has a way of judging people or dismissing people that don't fall on the spectrum of formal education. And then it also, there's something to be said about formal education affording you a level of access, right? A
Yep.
lot of us, at least for me, when people ask me what I did and what I studied, so I went to undergrad at Norfolk State University and HBCU in Norfolk, Virginia, and I studied entrepreneurship, but I didn't feel like I learned entrepreneurship. Like I don't think I understood I didn't feel like I learned the core of entrepreneurship because the other thing that did not dawn on me was that people would talk about every school had some semblance of people that didn't work in the fields that they were teaching.
Mm-hmm.
So you were learning things based off of book knowledge versus like also like lived experiences. So that was one thing with entrepreneurship. Then I went to Emerson College to get my master's in this field called integrated marketing communication, IMC. At the time, that did not IMC did not even exist. But what I liked about it was it wasn't hardcore business and it mixed what I felt like were aspects of mass communication. I'm going between both schools at this point, getting 2 degrees because I thought that I needed to be out here. And when you come out of school, all that time spent though Wise, you quickly learn that some of the fields that you're getting into would have preferred you have the actual on hands experience than you having the practical knowledge. And so, what are some things that you've experienced with podcasting? Because there were some things that you did, a lot of self teaching that happened for yourself and for lack of comparison, but like the pros, cons, and differences, right? Of being self-taught and how that propelled you and sometimes may have challenged you or proven to be challenging in your process of building ICN.
I will say I am 99% self taught. YouTube University took me a very, very long way, but I had the ability to
And wait, let's
practice.
explain. YouTube University is literally people going on YouTube and watching videos, y'all.
Yes,
Just to
yes,
get
for
y'all
those that
looking
know.
like typing in YouTube University in Google. No, 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 no. Like when people
No,
reference YouTube University, they really mean they just
just
used
going online,
and watching videos.
literally watching videos and like practicing what I was actually seeing. And I had the ability to practice that because I did have my podcast network. So the shows that we were already working with, especially like the first shows that we launched with, I was able to invite them to our recording studio that we had at the time. And yeah, I could engineer their session. Oh, now I have actual audio to edit that's for real, like I'm editing this because it's going live in a few hours or a few days or whatnot. Like, this is real stuff. Like, it wasn't just like, oh, I'm on YouTube now using a practice, or I recorded myself for 5 minutes. Like, I was literally, it was literally trial by fire, which
Yeah.
is actually how I work best, ironically. So,
Not ironic,
that
because I
was,
think you're in a subgroup of people that operate the same exact way.
yeah, you know what it is? You know what it is? I'm not gonna lie. My ADHD, what
Yeah.
happens is when things get like, when it gets real, that's when like everything works perfectly for me, if that makes sense. Like,
Yeah.
that is when like I can hyper focus in on what I need to do. It's when the pressure is on me. So my like holding my feet to the fire is literally, that's the best way for me to learn. So I did have that experience, but also I also was not really, I was in a space where I did not have to rush to get a job in the industry.
Mm-hmm.
And I think for myself personally, it worked to my advantage and to my disadvantage at the same time. It worked to my advantage because when I was meeting people in the podcast industry, it wasn't to get a job, or it wasn't to build a network or community relationship with them for hopes of getting opportunities and working with them in the future. That wasn't what it was. It was just like, oh yeah, you work on a podcast, cool. I work on podcasts too. Let's connect, let's chat, let's whatever. There was no pressure behind it. So that definitely worked to my advantage because I was able to meet a lot of people and build community online, because people knew I wasn't really looking for anything from them, you know. Where I would say it hurt me, and this is how I'm led to where I am now in my
Yeah.
career. I did not build, though I didn't, because I wasn't going in looking for a job. I never built relationships with people who were working in the industry. I worked with a lot of independent artists and a lot of independent producers. I worked with much less people who were in the actual, I mean, I don't want to say podcast industry, because there is a podcast industry, but there's also an industry of people, like there are industries that use podcasts as their medium, because this is a medium now. Like, we're no
Yeah.
longer just like focusing on podcasts only. I hated the fact that it felt like podcasting felt like we were in like a tunnel just screaming at other podcasters listen to our stuff. Because I didn't go for that network, I didn't have like those people in those high positions that would look out for me.
Mm-hmm.
But what I've come to find out now is that they've known me all along. And just actually, I don't know whether I don't want to put words in anyone's mouth, but they knew me all along. So when I connect with them on LinkedIn now, it's, oh my gosh, like, Wize, oh, how you doing? I heard so much about you. Or we talk on Twitter, it's like, oh my God, I couldn't believe you followed me. Like, what, ma'am? What are you talking about? Sir, please. This is just, I'm the same person I was, 4, 5, 6 months ago, a year ago, same person. But, people see particular titles, or people see like the things that you're doing. And two things happened to me, ironically, in June that possibly put my name in a higher space, or more visible space for them to validate my work. But in my eyes, forever and ever, I've been validated a long time ago. Like, this is my 10th year in podcasting, going on 11th in January. So
There was a time, at least when I got out of school, that companies wanted to see that you had experience from what they deemed a reputable company. Being self-taught and learning skill sets on your own did not hold the amount of weight that it does now. I disguised some of my creative self-taught work experience on my resume under my production company Imprint. I was creating and producing an internet radio show, producing a web series, the whole nine. It was valid to me, whether it had the stamp of approval from others or not. The industry has now done a complete 180. So don't be afraid to grab it by the balls and go full throttle on what it is that you want to learn and do. Now companies are seeking people that will take the initiative to learn these things, especially depending on the industry that you work in. And I'm curious if you saw that to be the case with you being self-taught and people wanting to see people with more of your skill sets as you were leaning more into your line of work.
I recently was on a job search this year, from about January to June. And during that job search, there were jobs that I had applied to, where people saw that I was overqualified. That was my first time I had ever saw that happened to me within this podcasting space.
Oh, gracious.
They
And
were,
what does overqualified look like? What does that mean to them?
I, shit, I couldn't even tell you.
Because overqualified, when you hear that, it's like, oh, they just don't want to pay you a certain amount, or there's a level of expectations that comes with someone that knows how to do the job and do the job well, that they're threatened by you coming for their position. Curious.
Right. And it's a combination of, if I had to guess, it's a combination of both of those things. To the point where I even like I started to dumb down my resume to make it seem less threatening. I have got to say that. Honestly, I will say, like, just to your other question, it's really generational differences that as to why like people more so like respect people who were self-taught.
Yeah.
It's generational because you have people who are now getting into these who are getting into like the middle management, senior leadership positions that are millennials that are, self-taught. They know someone that's self-taught. They know someone that's a part of the gig community. They have probably did a gig themselves or whatnot, and know that, YouTube University is a real thing. Like, we're almost at a point now where you don't even have to have that disclaimer, because it's like, oh yeah, I got that. Sure, I got to understand what that.
Oh, you'll figure it out.
Right, because you could just Google it. But it's like, so yeah, definitely generational differences. But I would say though, people right now, I'm not even sure if we can be able to use this on the podcast, but I'm just gonna say it anyway. Right now, that is what happened at my job. I had already dumbed down my resume essentially, and they hired me to be their podcast coordinator. I honestly am not sure if they knew how long I had been in podcasting. I'm not sure if they knew, if they Googled or searched my name. I'm not sure if any of these things, honestly. I'm not sure. I'm truly not sure, because I came in and literally I think like our first like 2 weeks at the job, we were doing this mock podcast with some of our interns, and I would explain to them like, well, no, they were about to leave, and I was just saying like, it's awesome to meet you all. Like, I've been in podcasting for 10 years. I haven't had like, it's really great to see people starting at their beginning. And everyone's like, oh my God, like, you've been there for 10 years. It's like, girl, did y'all not Google me? What are you talking about? Like, but I'm realizing that my resumes only said, that I've been in podcasting from 2015. But what I have realized since I've been at this job now is that they were looking for specialists and people who have an entrepreneurial spirit, because what I'm realizing has been happening, and I think this is maybe a shift that's going to happen in corporate America, is that people have gotten jobs for quite some time based on their degree and stayed in positions or continue to get positions because of the experience that they got, not the degree anymore.
So what does that mean for those that want to still pursue the formal education route? It's really based on the industry you want to work in and the position you want to hold.
When you think about higher education, it's not a bad thing, right? It's just that the system that we have here makes it so unaffordable that we have had to have other alternatives to make money, right? But we have a system that upholds this, you have to go to college to, for us, you have to get God forbid you get an associate's, but you have to get a bachelor's for us to want to even talk to you, for us to even identify or see you as someone as worthy for our conversation. That's not right. That is not right. So it plunged millions upon millions of people into debt just to have the opportunity for some to really only make like $40,000-$50,000 a year. I got into podcasting. I was a host. I love to talk, but I eventually learned that my bread and butter is the technology side of things, is at core, my storytelling, and the technology and the grasp of technology that I have is going to be what's going to work for me. And that is how I found my space in my space within this industry. I just did the work, met podcasters, kept doing the work. They say like you cut something 10,000 times. I literally have probably edited over 10,000 hours I've met hundreds, not even exaggerating, hundreds of podcasters. There has not been a day that I have not thought about podcasting since 2012. Not a day I ain't woke up on this planet and didn't have to think about a podcast. So if you're going to not get a degree, that's the type of grind and time you have to be on.
Like I mentioned earlier, I found my way to college because I was inspired by what I saw on TV. High school friends at the time were talking about the schools they wanted to go to. It just seemed like the obvious next step after high school for me. I also high-key enjoyed schooling when I was younger. Wize's path took him to school, and with him taking those seeds, I directed him to podcasting and building his own business. My seeds led me to trying a little bit of everything in the entertainment space, with me now getting clear on what I want to do. The foundation of school helped with that. Just have to choose what's right for you, which will look different for everyone. Life has a way of interrupting the vision we have for ourselves. Tell me a time, Wize, where you literally had a what the fuck just happened moment that caused you to course correct or change, like pivot in your life, whether it was personally, professionally, or both.
I'll give you all three. So I was in a terrible car accident in 2014. Now, where I was at this time in my career, in my life, I was still doing the Encore radio show, but I was working at this insurance company as my 9 to 5. And on my way to work one day, I got into a terrible car accident where I was a passenger in a 3-car accident and had to get spine surgery. Now, that was a true what the fuck moment, because for me, I had never really been injured to that extent in my entire life. So having to, even talk about spine surgery was just like, what the fuck? It was an everyday or what the fuck? I ain't gonna lie. Every day. But what caused the pivot for me was, for one, I was doing the Encore radio show. So every week at that point, I was going to Brooklyn to record, and I couldn't do that anymore. So I had to figure out how was I going to still have an impact in entertainment that is now that I'm not as mobile as I was before. So that caused me to start thinking about ways to be impactful. I had already had Encore radio show, and I was like, well, I want to switch over to a podcast versus just being a radio show. This might be my time to pivot. And that pivot led me out of, when I was Uncle Radio Show host, I would physically go to events. I'll be at shows from Thursday to Sunday every week. That aspect of my life was cut. So it was a huge shift in my life that really was caused by that car accident. But I gotta say, it worked out.
Accidents or things like that really recalibrate you in ways that you may not have even thought you needed to recalibrate, right? Like think about the excess way people were living before this pandemic, and then the little things that we were just accustomed to just being gone just like that, and companies having to pivot and doing things remotely, acting like they couldn't do things remotely before.
All that
And
time.
so when you talk about your spinal injury, I think about when I had debilitating back pains and how it literally was, Georgette, what the fuck do you really want to do with your life? And I'm not saying it in the way oh, we don't know, we're uncertain. It was one of those, why are you at a job that is not fulfilling you? And so I didn't immediately get on the bandwagon of the pivoting and the recalibrating, but it's interesting because not knowing at the time, that's the reason for your pivot. I remember when you started doing more things remotely and expanding in a different way that made it more helpful for you to just be more nimble. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you for sharing that. Because again, I know sometimes we're just living this life on sometimes we just wait for shit to happen, Wize, when it's sometimes the fire that becomes the light under our asses is not necessarily always what we expect it to be, but sometimes it's necessary.
Yep.
It's necessary. Getting into this last segment, what would have been the title of your story before your life interrupted moment? What would it be now?
What would have been the title of my story before my what the fuck moment? The title of my... that is such a great question. Okay, let me come back to the first part. So the title of my life now would just be The Story of Determination. If I had to title my life before my car accident, it was The Story of the Lucky Boy. Yeah. Like, things used to go very, very well in my life. It didn't make sense. Not that it didn't make sense, but it was like, you know, when things could pivot real bad, they always pivoted good. Mm-hmm. And then the car accident was like, oh, yeah, I'm not even, like, I just felt like so in control of my life and so in control of everything. Like, I could make things happen.
Yeah.
And being a passenger in this vehicle and getting into the car accident was like, oh, nah, but not only did I not make this happen, I truly had no control over it in general.
Right.
In general. So, yeah, that's that's that part. The ending, or where we are now, is just like, I never really saw obstacles before or felt like I had obstacles before. And that car accident, things just like it just felt like there were more and more obstacles, whether they were physical or mental or within like relationships with other people and stuff like that. It was just like it felt like it was a lot of like growing and growth, and me just being determined in what I wanted for myself and what I wanted for my life and what I saw and what I still see actively. It's a story of determination.
Those are good.
You're
I appreciate you.
Thank you for having me, Georgette. It is always a pleasure.
Oh, man. A lot of things have changed since I was in school. When anyone talks to me about furthering their education, I want to know their why. I think knowing why you're going is important. If it's attached to thinking the education will prove more valuable than the practical experience, I truly advise them to reconsider. I walked out of grad school with a lot of school loan debt between Norfolk State and Emerson. That was my path, though. I know the access a formal education has afforded me. That's why I plan to do a follow-up conversation with someone that chose the informal route, because I think it's important to hear nuanced sides of this conversation. What didn't work for me may have worked for someone else. To degree or not to degree, well, only you can determine that. As long as you're grounded in your why, you'll be all right. Until the next episode, peace. This podcast was written and hosted by me, Georgette Pierre, associate producer Tristan Bragg, and co-producer and editor Wize Grazette for the Indie Creative Network. Music by Otis McDonald, King Canyon, and Bail Bonds. You can follow my conversations on Twitter at Georgette and Instagram at Georgette Pierre. That's GeorgettePierre. You can follow the podcast on Twitter and Instagram at Black Nuance Pod. That's Black, NUANCEDPOD, or email us at blacknuancepod@gmail.com, spelled the same exact way. Subscribe and share from your favorite podcast app. We're streaming on Apple, Spotify, Google, Amazon, and more. Thanks for listening.